and welcome to Web Vibes Only, where we talk about all things web and web adjacent. My name is Ankita Sood, and with me, as always, we have Tyler Johnson. How's it going, Tyler?
It's going amazing. I'm excited for what we're here to talk about and can't wait to dive into it.
I know ever since we saw the developer release event for Angular V21, which dropped this Thursday, we have just been geeking out about it. The developer event was amazing. We'll drop a link to it and we'll share more information about it. But we just wanted to nerd out about the latest features that were released in Angular version 21, how awesome they are. For me, this is probably one of the most awaited releases, and I'm super excited that it's landed. Oh my goodness, I can't even wait to share everything with you all about it. So let's dive into it.
Let's do it.
Well, they covered a lot of it in their release blogs that they had, but four things that we want to highlight that are already mentioned in this blog as Zoneless is now the default experience. So whenever you now create a new Angular app, you don't have to call provide zoneless change detection. Instead, if you want Zone.js to be added, then you have to call provide zone change detection. I think just getting developers into the mindset of not even thinking or worrying about Zone.js is just an amazing strategy by the Angular team.
Absolutely. The other thing that it does is error messages that we get are going to be a little bit clearer now, because when change detection happened and there was some issue with some part updating or whatever, or an error that came out of that, sometimes it was hard to surface that through Zone.js. That's not going to be a problem anymore. So there's that to look forward to, easier troubleshooting.
For sure. This had been experimental for the past couple releases. However, all the Angular apps within Google have been zoneless since the past release. So they had enough evidence that it works flawlessly, and because they had provided it as experimental to developers, so they saw that a lot of people were adopting zoneless, and so now they were confident to release it as a new stable experience, and that's what we get. How exciting!
Super exciting.
And the next exciting thing that is also now stable is Vitest. Vitest has been heavily adopted and loved by almost every JavaScript framework community. And Angular had deprecated Karma in 2023, and now officially they support Vitest and it replaces Karma.
Yeah, Vitest is a great test runner. I'm really happy to see this.
Well, the blog is really detailed, and there's so many more features that are not even covered in the blog. For example, now HTTP client is enabled or configured by default. You don't even have to mention provide HTTP client unless you want to add more features that you want to add in it. Example, if you want to use the fetch API, then you add in this function, or if you want to use the interceptors, then you call in the with interceptors function to get that feature within it. Otherwise, you just don't even have to mention it. It's great for having it by default, especially for building out demo applications.
Yeah, it's really nice to see something like this. Angular has always prided itself on having everything you needed baked in, being an opinionated framework. And it always kind of felt weird that one of the first things you needed to do was to provide HTTP client. I think that this lowers the barrier of entry to Angular. It's just one less thing you have to think about when starting a new Angular app, which can only help people who are coming to Angular for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot has changed. The Angular.dev website, which is the official documentation site for Angular, has received a major revamp since the last upgrade. Examples are the Dependency Injection guide has received a major upgrade with very detailed documents. And we just love dependency injection in Angular. It's a superpower of Angular. Can't use it enough.
Yeah, and what's really cool about the dependency injection is there are a lot of other frameworks that kind of see the benefit to this kind of pattern. React hooks and the context API, stuff like that, that is similar. The format is different, but the concept is kind of the same, where you can just encapsulate some functionality that you're going to need to use and then bring it in where it's needed and kind of control what has access to it. The way you control access in React is you have to kind of create those boundaries by, by setting the context, and then everything within that, all of the children within that component kind of has access to the same scope. In Angular, it's a little bit easier and it doesn't influence your overall architecture as much because of the dependency injection mechanism in Angular. You can inject it where you need it. You can specify, I want this to be a singleton, the whole app uses it. And then another thing that they've done is in the official Angular DevTools, they now have an injector tree visualizer. You can actually see a visualization of your injector tree and see what's injected where. Any of those kind of bugs that you might run into about, well, these components should have the same version or same instance, but don't, you can go and kind of check that out, see where that's provided, and it's helpful in that way.
Angular DevTools have also, in the past few versions, received a major revamp. You can see your signals, you can see your routers, or all the routes that you have. It's really amazing. We also have an updated guide of how to use Tailwind CSS with Angular, which is super helpful. All you have to do is ng add Tailwind CSS if you want to add it, and it installs Tailwind and its pure dependencies for you. You can configure it the way you want and import the styles the way you want. It's super powerful.
And the Angular CLI will even prompt you now to ask if you want to install it.
Yeah.
I know Tailwind is still somewhat of a controversial subject, but if Tailwind is your thing and you like to use Tailwind, or you're using some plugin or something that is dependent on Tailwind, this is going to make your life easier, especially if you're just rapidly prototyping something. Having this included is going to help a lot.
For sure. There's always a love-hate relationship that a lot of people have with Tailwind. It's just nice that it's so easy to add it when you need it.
Yeah.
Styling is sometimes not the strongest suit for a lot of people, and Tailwind just enables that. And I don't think that people used to struggle a lot with was the material design and documentation, or just knowing how to theme it. I'm just gonna switch to dark mode real quick. Now the documentation around theming new material components is so detailed and helpful to understand with clear examples. Like, how do you use the primary palettes or the secondary palettes and things like that? They've really made it super easy to know what to do when, and what's the purpose of all the tokens and how they can be utilized or consumed.
Yeah, it's come a long way in terms of customizability and the overrides. That's not new to version 21, but it is, it's been a relatively recent change within the last few versions of Angular that Angular
Yeah.
material has become far, far, far easier to customize and theme in general. That being said, one thing that I do really wish that we could see is an official theme generator. If you go to popular UI libraries like ShadCN and stuff like that, you're going to find like these generators. Even Material UI for React, a lot of them have that these days, where you have this theme generator where it shows a bunch of UI component library components on the page, and you can in real time theme the website that you're looking at, and you see how it affects the components that are being rendered on the page and everything. And then when you're ready, you can just export that, put it directly in your project. There's still nothing like that for Angular material, not officially anyway. And that's something that I would like. That's a piece that I feel like is really missing that I would love to see.
Absolutely. I think that has been on our wish list for a really, really, really long time, and hopefully someday we'll have it. But who knows? It's come a long way, and it's really made things a lot easy to use with this documentation update, because like Keller mentioned, they added these as variables, and they keep adding more and more to make it easier to customize. However, you don't know what you don't know unless you debug and look it up. With this detailed guide and documentation, it makes things so much more easier, and you just are here for it, all of it. We love it. Okay. And like we mentioned earlier, the developer release event was fantastic. We've never seen anything like it, and it has just generated so much interest in the community and so much excitement. If you haven't watched it already, again, we'll drop the link below and definitely watch it. The whole concept of it was mind blowing, that Mark Thompson was chasing 4 keys, which kind of highlighted 4 uh, fabulous features about Angular that they wanted us to know about, and they did it inside of this 2D video game. The first thing that they covered were all the new Angular MCP features, which is now available as an experimental feature, I guess. It has all these tools that once you bring in with you, make you feel more confident in developing Angular apps. You can load the best practices, it can sort through the documentation and give you structured examples. And it also has the AI tutor inbuilt in it. It's just amazing to use.
Yeah, this is really next gen. And these are a couple of reasons why I think that's true. So we all know that the LLMs we're using are trained based on data that are a few years old. We know that there's this lag between information that exists today and the information that the LLM was trained on. So a lot of what you have to look into when you're using AI tools regularly or heavily is how do you bridge that gap to ensure that what it's generating or reading and explaining is up to date, it's modern. And adding this MCP server that has access to all of the documentation, including all of the references to every API Angular has, is a really great way to bridge that gap. It's really complete. And if stick around because we've got some examples to show you. And Kita generated some signal forms fun, and we're going to take a look at that. And she used AI to do some of this stuff. We're going to take a look at how Angular knew to build some things that are totally up to date, even though the LLM is using data, trained data from a few years ago. So
Yeah.
like the fact that this
Well,
is going
but I did leverage the Angular MCP. Well, at least I think I did because I had added it to the repo, and I think even though I wouldn't really always tell it to look up for best practices, but I just think that having it enabled somehow helps. I don't really understand how all of this works, honestly, like what goes to what model when I'm trying to prompt it to do something. But for my mental piece, I just felt more confident in building with AI because I had the Angular MCP enabled for that repo. So
in most cases, it will auto detect that and it'll just automatically use that MCP. And the other thing is, like, in this world where you have some other libraries or frameworks that kind of take more of a minimalist approach where you start a new project and then you have to add in all the pieces that you want, AI kind of has free reign there to install whatever it wants to install.
Yeah.
You can go through step by step and you can tell it, okay, I'm okay with it installing this. I'm okay with it installing that. But then if you have a different project, it may install other things and you don't really know why. Then you have to go through this prompting thing of, no, I don't want to use that. I want to use this. And yeah, that's fine. It's just prompts doesn't take forever. One of the things that Angular's opinionated nature does for us here in the world of AI is the AI can generate based on stuff that Angular already has. It doesn't bring in all these packages that you're then going to have to audit and say, I don't want to use an external package for that. Fewer packages means fewer dependencies, fewer potential of breaking, less obstacles in the way of staying up to date. There's just a lot of benefits to trying to keep those external dependencies to a minimum. I mean, Angular being a fully batteries included, opinionated framework is only going to help that. AI generated projects in Angular because of that are going to be more consistent. I'm pretty excited about how AI focused Angular is. In the world of AI, I think Angular's philosophy is going to shine.
Yeah, it is a really helpful framework, and a lot of its features like resource API seem like they're built for AI that enables developers to build with AI, and it's just so seamless to integrate and work with sometimes that it's just, especially since we have Signals API, everything is just so easy to develop. The developer experience has been phenomenal while building with AI with Angular. That's super exciting. Anyways, coming back to the developer event, like you mentioned earlier, me watch it. Cannot stress enough. Right after you finish watching this, but also stick around because we have a great demo to show you as well about signal forms and reactive forms. So this chases 4 keys. One of the features around which he has to go deeper was Angular MCP and Angular AI and all the documentation updates and everything around it. Then we have Angular ARIA, which is headless. And when we say headless, we mean completely headless. It's accessible components that have been added to Angular as a separate package. All you have to do is npm install Angular ARIA, and you have a fabulous list of 9 components that take care of accessibility and have zero. They come with 0 styles, so you can customize them to your heart's desire. They make it so much more easier to use.
Yeah. So if you're like me and you're looking at this list here and you're thinking, man, that doesn't seem like it's a very complete list. There's a lot of components that I like to use in my UIs that are missing here. Well, on first thought, that's what I had in mind. But as I think about it a little bit more, this is focused on components that were previously very difficult to style or customize. Some of that has to do with just, how the web is, and the web has gotten better over the last few years at styling things like combo boxes and autocomplete lists and stuff like that. But historically, a lot of that kind of stuff has been very difficult. And now that we can leverage CSS to do some of this stuff, all of a sudden, that means UI component libraries have to do less to do that. The focus of these aren't to provide a complete list of components that you might use, but to provide some utilities for you to make your own custom example, and without having to override any styles. So in HTML these days, most elements, that's not going to be a problem. The ones that you see here are going to be the ones that are a little bit more challenging to implement yourself, like the autocompletes or the grids or menu type things or toolbars. Having all of the ARIA or accessibility things there for you, that's just one less thing you have to worry about, especially if you're working on something that needs to be state ramp compliant or FedRAMP compliant for government use, that sort of thing. So don't let the lack of components here distract you. Don't let that influence you in a negative way, because you can still use component libraries if you want, but these things are specifically for things that are pretty difficult to implement yourself. It doesn't need to completely cover all of your use cases. It just needs to cover the ones that are, difficult to make accessible. And I think it does that really well.
It absolutely does. Thinking about accessibility left to right to left, there's so many aspects of it that are not just specific to color. There has to be keyboard support. There has to be enough interactivity or ARIA roles added to it, and they have to be correct. And there's so many aspects of accessibility that have to be ingrained in a component that you absolutely don't have to think about. And sure, we had Angular Material. However, that was built on a Material UI, and even though it's customizable, it's still built on Material Foundation. Angular ARIA just makes it so much simpler to use. It's a great library to have, a great option if you don't want to include Angular Material, but just want some components to begin with that are super accessible and highly customizable. Some of the examples on the documentation have themes provided that kind of give you the idea of how customizable they are when you look at the themes. The styles are CSS driven. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just tried to rapidly prototype something with Tailwind, but there was times where I wish I just had those Angular type utilities to make that a little bit easier, but I didn't really need the full CDK or full Angular material just to add this little multi-select thing in here. This is going to cover those types of examples pretty well.
Yeah, it's a really helpful tool to have. Okay, so we had Mac chasing a key for AI, like you mentioned, Angular ARIA, signal forms, which we'll share a demo with you just in a bit. And the fourth thing was the conclusion of an RFC that the Angular team had been running for quite a while and was apparently the most popular one ever. It was the most heavily commented one, and that was the Angular's official mascot. And we finally have a winner. It's the first one. So we did not select the other 2 fishes that we have, but we have Angie, who will be an Angular-shaped character. And I cannot wait to have a plushie and a keychain and a sticker and all the other things with this Angular mascot. I know the team would be releasing press kit with it shortly. I just want it in all my slides and everything that I ever do with Angular ever. So I'm super excited that we have an official mascot now.
Yeah, that's a really fun thing to see.
Yeah, it was funny. I think, Keller, you were mentioning when we learned that this was the most commented RFC, almost 2,000 comments. We clearly cared about our mascot a lot.
Yeah, I was surprised of all things. I thought signal forms RFCs and stuff like that would have been something that was more heavily discussed, but it turns out it's the Mascot.
Yeah, I know. Speaking of signal farms, this is something that we're super excited to share. We now created a demo app to compare signal farm and reactive farms. And like you can see, I'm running this in Firebase Studio. I have all these MCP servers enabled that I think while we were prompting kind of helps a lot with the code generation. Of course, your prompt is only good as you are, which means their app will only be as good as how much you know. So we do not recommend just YOLO prompting without having your base foundation or your core concepts being absolutely fundamentally clear. It's not a replacement for a developer for sure, at least not yet. The reactive farm and the signal farm are exactly the same from a user interface perspective. So users don't really know, or they don't even care which kind of a form you are using. However, from a code perspective, if we just look at the sheer number of lines, the signal form component has less than 200 lines, and the reactive form component goes on forever. It has more than 250 lines. It's just a wildly improved developer experience that I cannot be more happy with. It's fabulous.
This is the thing that I've been waiting on for years. Reactive forms were incomplete to the point that it created some pain points that made me wonder whether reactive forms were worth it over template-driven forms even. And in some cases, template-driven forms just made things easier and more straightforward. When it comes to reactivity, getting value changes and wanting to debounce stuff, just debounce user actions so that you're not firing off requests like search requests or something like that while the user is still typing on every keystroke. It's useful for stuff like that. And I fully recognize that reactive forms were great for stuff like that. But I think it's safe to say that if you've built a lot of forms in Angular, you've run into the limitations of reactive forms, and you've run into some problems that were very difficult to diagnose. And I would even wager to say that you may have run into some defaults with reactive forms that may not have made sense to you. And I think a lot of us have been there. The signal form API, every one of those pain points that I've run into with reactive forms, the signal form API solves them, every one of them. I work with a lot of frameworks. I've done forms in a lot of frameworks over the years. Signal form API is shaping up to be the best form API I've ever used across any framework. And I'm very, very impressed with it.
Yeah, it has been a pleasure to code with. Forms should not be that hard, but they kind of are. And one of the most frustrating forms, at least here in the United States, is to fill the patient intake form whenever you go to a new health provider. It's just so many fields that you have to go to. This is probably the simplest form that I have here in this demo that you would ever have to fill. But one example that I wanted to highlight about how easy it is with signal forms compared to a reactive form is, so for a reactive form, when you select, suppose if I just select what's November, I'm showing how many days old you are. If I select a date in the same year, I'm showing like month and days. But if I select a completely different year, then it shows you your age in years and not necessarily the years and months. So quite a lot of computation happening here to calculate the age, as you can imagine. In a reactive form, I have a date of birth that is a signal whose value is being set by the value changes that are made. So the value of it is being set by subscribing to a value change. And you can kind of see how you have to maintain a separate signal, a separate state for the form's value to be able to then compute on it and build upon changes in an input field. That just seems like too much work happening. In a signal form, everything already is a signal. That's how you build your model for the form, and then you just pass it to the signal. So to calculate the age, you just read the value directly. There's no subscription required. You still have to do all the same computation that you would need to do in a reactive form to calculate what the age would be. But you can reference the actual field value here in just one line of code. You don't have to subscribe to it in a constructor somewhere and do all sorts of other things to get that value, which is how it should have been all along. And so signal forms make that super easy.
Yep. And this kind of synchronous access to state like this is the thing that the Signal API in general as a reactive primitive in Angular gives us. So a lot of questions I see people have is, why do we have yet another form solution in Angular? And it's because the ones that we had before were incomplete. And this is the final form of Angular forms, I guess you can say, where it is actually making use of the Angular reactive primitive, the signal, and there are enormous performance benefits to this as well. Because of that synchronous access to state, being able to look in the DevTools and see the values of your signals, this is going to be so much easier to debug than you had with asynchronous values that you had to subscribe to with RxJS. You could not use DevTools to look in those and see the values. This is an enormous value add in Angular. This changes the game in terms of forms in Angular.
Yeah, it just makes any computation that you might need to add so much more easy. And even the way that you add validators in your form has changed, and it's so much more easy like that. Because once you define the model and all the fields that are required and their type, you can have that specified for a signal form. And because in a reactive form, you would have to use validators. You can see that you had to import form validators from Angular forms, and then you would have to specify all the validation that would be required that you would want to apply to that field about the length or pattern. Like for a phone number, I have specified this pattern that I wanted to have. So if you don't have an insurance provider specified and you just click this checkbox, I wanted the user to be able to hit submit. But the minute they provide a health insurance provider, I wanted to make the policy number mandatory or required field. So that's some conditional validation that I had to add for this. Again, I had to write this whole function to do that in a reactive form. But for signal forms, because it's all part of the schema and the template, it's super easy to specify that. Again, just look at the number of lines. That should tell you everything. It's just a condition. When there's a value in that field, make sure the insurance provider, if it's not null or provided, then the policy number is required. You can't click submit. Even if you hit this button, this is now a required field. The power to control your validation, your form, is such an easier experience in signal forms than in reactive forms that it's unbelievable, honestly.
That really highlights one of the pain points of reactive forms in that cross-field validation in a form has historically been pretty challenging, or at least it can get that way. But in signal forms, it's not at all. You're just referencing a signal, just another signal. You don't have to look at the form API, get that, and then assert that we were able to get this control dynamically by passing in this magic string, right? You don't have to go through any of that. This is a signal, and it's so much easier. Like autocomplete, your DevTools are going to be able to give you autocomplete options for any of these signals that you're going to have to reference. The developer experience here is really great. One other thing that I wanted to just briefly mention about this is that before, if you wanted to determine whether or not your form was pristine, you had to listen to value changes on reactive forms, and then you had to check the form status or form pristine to see. But in order to get that to be reactive, you had to listen to value changes. Every time a value changed, you had to go reevaluate whether or not the form's pristine. Here, this is just a signal, form.pristine, and and it updates. It's that simple. The same thing with dirty, those types of form APIs that historically weren't really exposed through their own. And I know that there's status changes, but status changes, it really is just about a form going from valid to invalid, right? That doesn't tell you whether or not it's dirty. A form can be dirty or it could be not pristine and still be valid. So that really didn't answer that use case. But signal forms just makes that so. That's just yet another little kind of complaint that I had with reactive forms that's just like super easy.
Yeah, that's great. Even just all your validators, like I just have a schema.ts file in which I've specified all the validations that are required. And it's just look visually pleasing to have all your files formatted the way that you want it to be. Logically, it makes so much more sense. It's so logical to specify what the schema should be and what it should adhere to. It's an absolute pleasure. Another thing that we've added in this demo, just to be able to highlight its significance, is something that we mentioned all earlier, is the REI components. This gender dropdown that you see over here is actually this combo box from Angular ARIA. You see, all you have to do is add the directive for it, and the container is the overlay that opens. You will notice that it kind of depends on CDK connected overlay to handle its positioning and everything. So not all ARIA components can be used by itself. This is one example of that you would have to use a combination of CDK and ARIA component to get the full benefit of it. But that's not, you just need to include the overlay module, like I didn't have to bring in anything else from the CDK, just the overlay module to be able to use it. It's just so easy. You have the options and you click, and you can just specify the styles the way you want it with all the hover or the background or the font size and all these things. What this indicator should be. Literally everything about this comma box can be specified or styled the way that you would want it to be. What the popover should be like. If you should open below it, if you should match the width of the input field or the trigger that is opening it. It was a great experience to use this ARIA component in the signal form. It felt very modern using these Angular modern features or techniques that we have now at our leverage. So we had a lot of fun things to share about Angular v21. Let us know whenever you do give that version a try. Just do an ng update and you'll have all the new features at your fingertips. And if you build anything cool and fun and fantastic, drop a note about it in the comment section, and we will love to hear that or see your examples. I'll also drop a note about obviously the developer release event because that was fan-fabulastic. And then also a link to this repo with the single it compares your single forms with reactive forms.
Absolutely. Definitely go watch that if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, and until next time, take care, y'all. See ya. Thank you for tuning in.